Making a game about World War I is kind of a dumb idea. Primitive weapons and vehicles, battles that moved at a glacial pace. It seems like it wouldn't work, and the market proves it. Just take a look around and see how many games there are about other wars. There are tons of games about World War II, Call of Duty, Battlefield 1942, and Medal of Honor. There are tons of games about the Cold War. Black Ops is still covering it to this day. Of course, there are tons of games about Modern Warfare for starters, but also Counter-Strike and Rainbow Six. There are games about future warfare, things that haven't even happened yet or are purely science fiction. There are even games about feudal war, like Chivalry and Kingdom Come Deliverance. But there is one game, one AAA game about the Great War, and that's Battlefield 1. The answer to the video title might seem obvious then. Why aren't there any games like Battlefield 1? Because making an FPS game about World War I is a bad idea. It must be. And yet, Battlefield 1 is a good game. It was received very well on its release in 2016, and it still maintains an active player base to this day. So then how? How did Battlefield 1 beat the odds? How does this game stand alone? Why hasn't its success spawned any copycats? Let's take a look at its DNA to figure out how DICE managed to pull it off and ironically create the most iconic Battlefield game to date. First and foremost, one of the most interesting things about this game that makes it so captivating is its stark contrast between the absolute horror of World War I and the game's fast-paced fun. The war to end all wars was one of the greatest losses of life in all of human history. Over 10 million soldiers gave their lives for this senseless conflict that ended nothing. New weapons like the flamethrower terrified soldiers on the front lines, and poison gas was later outright banned worldwide. Troops suffered in trenches for weeks or months at a time. Once peaceful towns and villages became active war zones. There's an ethical concern about making a game about this. World War II games almost always place you against the Axis powers. There are a few complaints about extinguishing Nazi peons, often in amusingly creative ways. But the Great War had no specific common enemy. It was hell on earth for all sides of the conflict. Making a game about this topic was a very big challenge, both conventionally and with respect to the source material, for lack of a better phrase. But there are a lot of ideas here they can work with. It needed to be just right. DICE had their work cut out for them. Its first challenge is working with the armaments of the era. The first portable automatic weapons were just being produced, and many common armaments of the period were bolt-action and semi-automatic long rifles. At the start of the war, the first plane was invented just 11 years ago in 1903. There was no such thing as a tank in 1914, or an assault rifle for that matter. These weapons, in a word? Primitive. But primitive can be interesting. They're novel, and often only seen in museums. Most people have never seen a Lewis gun in action, or in any other shooter for that matter. So opportunity is here. The problem is that many of these weapons would not be fun in the context of a shooter. Machine guns were extremely heavy, and the common British Lewis gun was operated by two, one to carry ammunition and one to carry the gun. Standard issue rifles were made very quickly and at as low a cost as possible. Firearms like the Ross rifle jammed frequently, with performance worsening in field conditions. There are very few games with jamming as a mechanic, and for good reason. It's just annoying. Thus, for gameplay's sake, all weapons need to be 100% reliable and operable 100% of the time. Mud and blood be damned. Outside of those two categories existed less common or experimental designs. Weapons like the Velar Perosa or Maxim SMG 0818 technically existed, but either saw very little frontline service or was only ever a prototype. DICE would have to take some creative liberty with the armamentarium of the game. They added any and all weapons they could find from the era, regardless of whether they even really existed at all. Classic weapons like the SMLE Mark III were faithfully recreated for the history buffs, but oddities like the Xiaosha, the Howdah pistol, and the tiny Calibri were implemented as novelties. Needing another person to carry your ammo for you would be a disaster, so light machine guns needed to be reworked to be self-portable. It's a careful balance between historically accurate and fan fiction. A balance that takes a lot of work to figure out. It sounds simple, looking at the situation at face value. It's a shooter. Shooters need to have interesting guns. But DICE was taking a risk. Remember, they needed to pay respect to the war. The limitations of some of these weapons were all part of the experience. So they didn't take the gun out of the limitation, they took the limitation out of the gun. No jamming, no extra person to fire your weapon, and no national limitations either. Shotguns for all, not just the Americans. In-game, you can choose from all types of guns depending on your class. It's good fun to run around with an MG15 firing from a 200-round box magazine. Impossible in reality, but plausible here. In a similar vein, the logistics and equipment of World War I were equally primitive. Planes were still in their infancy, and the very first tank was built in 1915, which was essentially a moving metal box with holes for guns to poke out of. Battlefield is known for its vehicles. They need to be part of the gameplay. So, like they did with the weapons, they embrace the crude nature of such machines. In-game planes are delicate and difficult to control, and tanks are weird and awkward. They're still effective in gameplay in the right hands, but their eccentricities could only be accepted in this context. Just like how a tank appearing next to cavalry could only appear in this context too. What separates vehicles from infantry weapons though are their power. The game needs some spectacle. Enter the idea of the behemoths. Armored trains, giant dirigible airships, and dreadnoughts are massive vehicles taken from history that are issued to struggling teams. A small group of players can board them, take objectives, and obliterate the opposition with ease until their eventual demise. It's like a boss fight for the winning team, and it's sort of a mystery why nobody has stolen this concept for future games. It works very well here. There is just nothing like finally taking out the opposing team's airship only for it to die in a fiery explosion and crash into the land, remaining there as an obstacle for the rest of the match. Part silly, fully awesome. These would never be able to appear in any other game. World War I is the only setting where you could convert a blimp to a war machine and call it a legitimate tactic. So adding these in was a bit of a stroke of genius. A less fortunate aspect of the era is in regards to the human condition. If you were shot in the leg, there was a good chance you'd simply die. Field medicine was little more than a clean bandage, some opium, or an amputation. Communication was also challenging. Field telephones and telegraphs were unreliable and could easily be sabotaged, and getting information to the front lines was a constant struggle for all actors during the war. Some armies didn't have good supply lines, food was scarce in the trenches, and small arms and ammunition were often short on supply. Lots of tools and equipment existed, but their prevalence was a product of logistics. DICE needed to convert these ideas to gameplay concepts, and fortunately for them, Battlefield's class system was already the perfect solution for all these painful aspects of realism. 4 lean classes cover the loose roles soldiers had during the Great War, and have access to equipment that existed during the time, even if it wasn't very common or even realistic. If people could be brought back from the dead from a shot through the head with a revive syringe, surely the war would have been much different. No need to worry about losing that leg with the medic's medical crate, and ammunition is not a problem with the support's never-ending ammo box. The class system allows all the weapons and equipment to be divided into playstyles. No sniping with a bottomless box of ammo at all times. players need to cooperate and play as a team to cover their needs. Assaults are restricted to use the submachine guns and shotguns of the time, and they carry anti-vehicle weapons, making them perfect as the frontline soldiers. Medics use the autoloading rifles and are responsible for the welfare of their team, with their healing potential and rifle grenade utility. Supports can gain the strength of 2 men, carrying both a light machine gun as well as ammunition for their team, and access to artillery emplacements. And scouts get the marksman rifles, supplemented by a variety of scout-adjacent tools, like armor-piercing bullets, a little shield, and a flare gun to spot enemies. They all depend on each other for something. Assaults are best at pushing, mechs are good at healing, supports are good at suppression, and scouts are good at spotting. Appending the battlefield class system was a given for a new entry in the series, but the addition of operations let these roles shine as the front lines, mid lines, and back lines during any match. Assaults naturally rush objectives and take space, with medics and supports trailing behind supplying either healing or ammunition, and scouts in the back marking and picking off high-value targets. Operations, as well as many other modes, take place at real battles during World War I. River Somme, Fort de Vaux, Whoopkov Pass, and Verdun are just a few of the landscapes players will shoot, revive, and blow up their fellow man fighting to take or defend territory. These maps are gorgeous and are somewhat faithfully recreated from the real-world counterparts. At times snowy, other times lush. The color palette has incredible variety. The match can start clear, fog rolls in, and clears up again. There's a lot of life put into each place in the world, and Battlefield's famous destruction model was seamlessly integrated into these locations. Explosions crater the earth, and tanks roll right on through simple structures. The dynamic nature of the environment provides a much welcome impact to player actions. Operations breathed new life into the Battlefield series, as it turned out that splitting up 6 control points into 3 sets of 2 in sequence proves to further push players into their roles, and conquering the last objective with a handful of men to spare is a feeling like no other. Of course, these locations and battles during the war were modified for gameplay purposes. You just can't have a 2-month-long match. But being at the River Somme grounds the player into the setting and really sells the idea you're in World War I. There's a very good framework here. Interesting weapons and equipment, simple yet rewarding roles and classes, a great core game mode, and a variety of history-inspired settings to draw players into. The cake is done, but the frosting is what the game needs. Incredible sound design bathes each battle in a wave of booming explosions, screams, and callouts. Each nation has its own array of distinct voice actors and outfit models for each class that you'll hear and see frequently. It almost sounds weird hearing an English-speaking person in this game, as each nation speaks their own mother tongue, and you can quickly get used to the German, Ottoman, and Italian lines of dialogue. When the tension of battle is at its highest, all you hear is the blast of artillery, the constant sound of gunfire, the roaring engines of tanks and planes, and the death cries of your brothers in arms. The audio team at DICE really outdid themselves here. It's so well produced and real sounding that it might be too much for some players. And on release, it was actually a minor point of criticism against the game. The sound is what embodies the setting above all else. Between that, the visuals, the setting, and the gameplay, DICE had a recipe for a captivating Battlefield experience. A smidge of its iconic destruction model transforms maps from rolling vistas to crater-ridden death zones, and its class system allows anyone to perform a simple job and contribute to the war effort. Vehicles like tanks, planes, and cavalry add a unique flavor to the player experience, and behemoths are fun boss-like entities supplied to struggling teams in times of need. The question, why aren't there any games like Battlefield 1, might seem clear now. Take a look at all the work DICE needed to do in order to make this game work. A complete overhaul of the weapons, a complete overhaul of vehicles, dozens of detailed maps of real-life locations, a robust class system, a destruction system to crater terrain and level buildings, a soundscape containing over 175,000 audio files. Translating just one battle into a match is an incredible undertaking, never mind all fronts of the war. And to do all of that in good faith is a Herculean task. It's one thing taking a specific gun or a specific story and putting it into the game. It's another to mold that into a puzzle piece that fits with the complete picture. Take a look at the first campaign mission, Storm of Steel, named after the memoir of the same name. It combines everything this game does well. An engaging, hauntingly atmospheric opening that throws you directly into the middle of no man's land. Each time you die, your perspective shifts to a different soldier participating in the battle. It shows you the scale, the trepidation, the savagery, while still being morbidly fun. It makes you feel wrong. These Germans may have been real people, their life extinguished en masse by your hand. A feeling of guilt that must have plagued surviving soldiers after the war. Just a simulation for you. But what you see, what you hear, what you feel, it's the most authentic interactive slice of the war ever created. A deeply memorable experience that can only be done in the way that the game presents. That's why making a game about World War I is kind of a dumb idea. It's simply a massive amount of work. Nearly every piece of the war had to be reinvented for playability, and a lot of supplemental systems needed to be added to make it work. Systems that Battlefield already had in previous titles. To make a game greater than what DICE pulled off with Battlefield 1 is nearly impossible. Plus, they had time on their side. Battlefield 1 was developed and released during the war's centennial anniversary, and now that it ended over 100 years ago, it seems interest in the war is at an all-time low. After all, everyone who ever lived through it is now gone. A relic in history. Why try to make a game to live up to Battlefield 1? It was released at the exact right moment. It wouldn't be a surprise if it was remembered as the studio's magnum opus. It's lightning in a bottle, and DICE used every trick in the book to make this game not just play, but feel like history. A bad idea, executed perfectly. Maybe that's the point. The war to end all wars didn't end war, but maybe the game to end all games about the war to end all wars can. Only time will tell. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. This has been Game DNA. Keep playing and keep learning.